Hello, everybody. Welcome. This morning, we're going to take a look at just a few of the many viable Negro League candidates for the Baseball Hall of Fame. But first, let's consider how we got here. The Hall of Fame has had a somewhat awkward relationship with the Negro Leagues. When they first announced Negro Leaguers would be enshrined back in the early 1970s, the plan was to have a special wing for these inductees. Separate but equal, I'm sure. The backlash against this insulting idea convinced the powers that be to hang the Negro Leaguers' plaques in the main gallery with everyone else, just as they should have all along. The first 9 inductees, chosen by a special committee, comprised a symbolic all-star team. I say symbolic because at the time there were no reliable statistics for these players, nor much hope that there ever would be. The symbolic All-Stars, selected between 1971 and 1977, first base Buck Leonard, second base Martin Dihigo, shortstop John Henry Lloyd, third base Judy Johnson, left field Cool Papa Bell, center field Oscar Charleston, right field Monty Irvin, catcher Josh Gibson, and pitcher Satchel Paige.
Ooh.
In 1981, that all-star team got a manager with the long overdue enshrinement of Rube Foster. The special committee disbanded, but Negro Leaguers were still eligible for selection by the Veterans Committee, who elected Ray Dandridge in 1987, and then a flurry of players between 1995 and 2001. Leon Day, Willie Foster, Willie Wells, Bullet Rogan, Smokey Joe Williams, Turkey Stearns, and Hilton Smith. In 2006, another special committee added 17 more blackball figures. Ray Brown, Willard Brown, Andy Cooper, Frank Grant, Pete Hill, Biz Mackey, Effa Manley, Jose Mendez, Alex Pompey, Cumberland Posey, Louis Santop, Mule Suttles, Ben Taylor, Cristobal Torriente, Saul White, J.L. Wilkinson, and Judd Wilson. That grand election in 2006 was meant to be the final word on the subject, but it came before the release of a massive amount of statistical data that allows us to evaluate these players in ways that were never possible before. 2 additional Negro League selections were made in 2022, Buck O'Neill and Cooperstown native Bud Fowler. And let's not forget about the 7 Negro League veterans selected for their contributions to the major leagues post-integration: Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, Ernie Banks, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Larry Doby, and Minnie Minoso. This chart was provided by our friend Ted Noor and shows the racial breakdown of Hall of Fame players in both the segregated and integrated eras. In the segregated era from 1876 to 1946, there are 170 players in Cooperstown who spent the majority of their career in that time. 138 of them are white, 32 are black. For the integrated era since 1947, 108 total Hall of Famers, 62 white, and 46 black. So we've got 18.8% black from the representation from the segregated era, but 42.6 from the integrated era. If we were to extend that 42.6% back to the segregated era, there would need to be 106 blackball players in the hall. We would need to add 74 Negro League players to the Hall of Fame. Could you mute, please? Thank you. We would need to add 74 Negro League players to the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not proposing racial quotas or anything of that sort, but these figures do illustrate a serious imbalance and demonstrates why the correct answer to the question, what Negro Leaguers belong in the Hall of Fame, is a bunch of guys. Unfortunately, the prospects for future Negro League inductees at the moment are pretty bleak. The old Veterans Committee for the Hall has been split into three separate committees, which meet on a 3-year cycle. The contemporary baseball era covers the period 1980 to the present and is covered by two separate ballots. The contemporary players election will be announced this December for induction next summer. Next year, there will be an election for post-1980 managers, executives, and umpires. And in December 2027, there will be an election for the classic baseball era, covering everything before 1980, including the Negro Leagues. The Classic Era Committee met last December and selected Dick Allen and Dave Parker for enshrinement. There were two Negro League figures on that ballot, John Donaldson and Vic Harris. Also nominated were Ken Boyer, Steve Garvey, Tommy John, and Luis Tiant Jr. A panel of 16 voted on these men with 12 votes necessary for selection. While Negro League historians Larry Lester and Leslie Heafy were members of that committee, it was dominated by former players like Paul Molitor, Eddie Murray, Tony Perez, Lee Smith, and Ozzie Smith. In other words, men who played with and against the other candidates, but would likely have little to no knowledge of the Negro Leaguers. With 75% of the electors required for nomination, the deck was stacked against Donaldson and Harris and will be similarly stacked against whatever Negro Leaguers are nominated in 2027. The fact of the matter is that the statistics now available at seamheads.com and retrosheet.org extend our knowledge and understanding of these players exponentially, and the time is right for another special election based on that new knowledge. No such election is on the horizon at this time, so what follows here is merely wishful thinking for now. There are dozens of viable Negro League figures who could be considered for the Hall of Fame. This morning, I'm just going to take a look at 7 candidates. These aren't the best 7 or the top 7 or anything like that, just 7 about which I felt I had something to say. And we'll start with my favorite candidates. A pair of shortstops who I would enshrine in Cooperstown right now if I had the authority. Grant Home Run Johnson and Dick Lundy. Grant Home Run Johnson, born September 23, 1872 in Findlay, Ohio, died in 1963 in Buffalo, New York at the age of 90. Shortstop for the Page Fence Giants, Chicago Columbia Giants, Cuban X Giants, Philadelphia Giants, Brooklyn Royal Giants, and other Giants, 1895 to 1914. But to tell the story of Grant Johnson, we need to take a step back to the story of Bud Fowler. Born John W. Jackson, 1858 in Fort Plain, New York, grew up in nearby Cooperstown. First African-American in organized baseball in 1878 with the Lynn, Massachusetts Live Oaks of the International Association, baseball's first minor league. Fowler played in white leagues in Massachusetts, Ontario, Minnesota, Iowa, Colorado, Kansas, New York, Vermont, Indiana, New Mexico, Michigan, Illinois, Nebraska, and Ohio between 1878 and 1893. In 1894, the 36-year-old Fowler hooked up with the Findlay, Ohio Sluggers, who featured 21-year-old Findlay native Grant Johnson. That's Johnson seated on the far left and Fowler sitting on the far right. Grant Johnson hit 60 home runs for the Sluggers that summer, earning a nickname that would last him a lifetime. The next season, Fowler and Johnson formed a traveling black team sponsored by the Page Woven Wire Fence Company of Adrian, Michigan. For 4 seasons, from 1895 to 1898, the Page Fence Giants were one of the leading black baseball teams in the country. Fowler was connected to black talent nationwide and managed to lure many of the best players in the game to the club. Their published one-loss record over the 4 years was 500 wins against 76 losses, an .868 winning percentage. Home Run Johnson was their star and main attraction. These are the travels of Grant Johnson over his 20-year career. He regularly played for the best black ball clubs of the day and was typically his team's best player. Johnson's entire career took place before organized black leagues began in 1920, which causes problems in documenting his career. The statistical database at Seamheads includes games played against top quality competition. Such games were rare for black clubs in the first half of Grant Johnson's career, as you can see here. The first 10 years of his career, ages 22 to 31, are documented in the database by just 29 games. This chart provides an overview of Johnson's data in Seamheads. From 22 to 31, 29 games. From ages 32 to 41, 168 games. So that means that 15% of the statistics for Johnson represent the prime of his career, and 85% of the stats are from the downside of his career. Despite that handicap, those numbers are still very impressive. These are career leaderboards for the years of Home Run Johnson's career, 1894 to 1914. And in batting average, he's third behind Hall of Famers Pete Hill and John Henry Johnson. On base percentage, the same thing, third behind Hill and Johnson. In slugging percentage, he's behind Hill, John Henry Lloyd. I'm sorry. I kept saying Johnson. Pop Lloyd, and a couple of long forgotten stars. And in OPS, he's fourth. Now, Pete Hill, John Henry Lloyd, and Jules Thomas were a generation younger than Grant Johnson, and their respective primes are much better represented in the statistics. Only the greatly underappreciated pitcher outfielder Harry Buckner is a contemporary of Johnson among the players on these lists. We can only speculate what sort of batting numbers Johnson would have put up in his prime. But when you consider that he more than held his own when he was past his prime, they no doubt would have been impressive. And what about defense? In defensive runs saved by a shortstop during the years of his career, Johnson is second only to Cuban Hall of Famer Pelayo Chacon, and his fielding percentage of .936 ranks first among all shortstops, which suggests that Johnson was a very good defensive shortstop and possibly elite. The folks at Seamheads calculate wins above replacement, and while one should handle Negro League WAR figures gingerly, it is worth noting that Grant Johnson's career WAR per 162 games is 10.6. 10.6 wins above replacement per 162 games. That happens to be the highest total in Negro League history, ahead of everyone. You put all of this together, and there's little doubt in my mind that Grant Johnson was the best black ball player of his era and one of the greatest of all time. The other player I'd enshrine immediately is Dick Lundy. Born July 10th, 1898 in Jacksonville, Florida, died in Jacksonville in 1962 at the age of 63. Shortstop for the Backrack Giants, Baltimore Black Sox, and others between 1916 and 1937. In 2021, the Sabre Negro Leagues Research Committee conducted a poll to determine the 101 most notable personalities in Black baseball history not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. The list is a Rosetta Stone of Hall of Fame candidates, and topping the list, the only person named on every ballot submitted, was Dick Lundy. You would think that means Lundy is a slam dunk candidate for the Hall. But the fact is, he's only appeared on the ballot once in the grand election of 2006, where he somehow fell short of the 75% required. Now his candidate hasn't been reconsidered for 19 years. Let's take a look at some of his credentials. He broke in with the Backrack Giants of Atlantic City, New Jersey in 1916 at the age of 17 and spent most of his first 13 years in pro ball with the Backracks. In the 6-year pre-league portion of his career, 1917 to 22, Lundy ranks third in OPS amongst Eastern ball players, behind Hall of Famers Louis Santop and John Henry Lloyd. During this time, Lundy, at the very beginning of his career, posted very similar offensive numbers to Lloyd nearing the end of his. 347 batting average against 346, 400 OPS on base percentage against 401. OPSs are very similar. In upcoming seasons, these two would become teammates, with Pop Lloyd moving to second base to make way for Lundy at shortstop. In 1923, the Eastern Colored League was organized, and for the next 6 years, Lundy was one of the circuit's brightest stars. He's the all-time ACL leader in hits, third in runs scored, first in runs batted in, also fourth in doubles, and fifth in triples. In 1926 and 27, Lundy led the Backracks to back-to-back Eastern Colored League pennants as their shortstop and manager. And in 1929, he won another pennant, anchoring the Baltimore Black Sox fabled million-dollar infield. Judd Wilson at first, Frank Warfield at second, Lundy at short, and Oliver the Ghost Marcel at third. In the defensive metrics at seam heads, Lundy ranks second to Dobie Moore in career defensive runs saved by a shortstop. He's sixth all-time in runs saved per 1,000 innings. The only comparable hitters ranked in that neighborhood are Grant Johnson and Dobie Moore, who's ineligible for the Hall of Fame because he played only 7 seasons. In single season runs saved, Lundy posted 3 years in the top 15 all time. According to seam heads, career WAR Negro League shortstops, Willie Wells is first, John Henry Lloyd is second, Dick Lundy third, followed by Dobie Moore and Pelayo Chacon. The most comparable major league players based on seam head similarity scores are Archie Vaughan, Derek Jeter, Glenn Wright, Barry Larkin, and Joe Cronin, 4 Hall of Famers among the 5. The bottom line here is that the Mount Rushmore of Negro League shortstops is Grant Home Run Johnson, John Henry Pop Lloyd, King Richard Lundy, and Willie the Devil Wells. 2 of them are in the Hall of Fame, and all 4 belong. Next, we'll look at some managers. There are 4 Negro League team owners enshrined in Cooperstown, but only one manager, Rube Foster, who also happened to be a team owner, black pitcher of his generation. So essentially, there's no one enshrined in the Hall for their Negro League managerial career. Here are 3 solid candidates to rectify this situation: C.I. Taylor, Dave Malarcher, and Vic Harris. Charles Eshon Taylor, Charles Eshon Taylor, born January 20th, 1875 in Anderson, South Carolina, died in February of 22 in Indianapolis at the age of 47. Manager of the Birmingham Giants, West Baden Strudels, and Indianapolis ABCs, 1907 to 21. C.I. Taylor was the oldest of the famous Taylor brothers. From left to right, third baseman Candy Jim, pitcher Steel Arm Johnny, second baseman and manager C.I., and the youngest, first baseman and Hall of Famer Ben Taylor. C.I.'s managerial career started in 1907 with the Birmingham Giants, the first black pro team in that Alabama city. From there, he took charge of the West Baden Strudels, a resort hotel team near French Lick, Indiana, hometown of NBA legend Larry Bird. In 1914, C.I. purchased half interest in the Indianapolis ABCs, moved his West Baden ball club north to the capital, and built one of black baseball's leading clubs. And I want you to notice in this team photo, sitting second from the left, is a very young Oscar Charleston. In 1916, Taylor's ABCs defeated Rube Foster's Chicago American Giants in a hotly contested series for the unofficial Black Baseball Championship, and I invite you all to check out my YouTube presentation about that series. But it isn't just C.I. Taylor's managerial record that makes him Hall of Fame worthy. Rather, it's his influence on the Black game. You might be familiar with the concept of a coaching or managerial tree. The Bill Belichick coaching tree, for example, includes coaches who started out under Belichick, including Nick Saban, Kirk Ferentz, and Mike Vrabel. In 2015, ESPN's Steve Wolf traced managerial connections for all 30 current major league managers back to one common source. Wolf found that all 30 current big league managers could be traced back to one of three men, John McGraw, Connie Mack, or Miller Huggins. And those three men all played under Hall of Fame manager Ned Hanlon, who ESPN dubbed the father of modern baseball. And this is the sort of influence that C.I. Taylor had over organized Black baseball. This is a list of the 8 men who managed 3 or 4 Negro League pennant winners. And I've highlighted 4 of them, fully half the list, who got their start as players under C.I. Taylor. Here are 8 men who started under C.I. and went on to manage nearly 6,000 games combined in the Negro Leagues. The right column shows where they rank all time in games managed. Candy Jim Taylor, C.I.'s little brother and the all-time leader in games managed in the Negro Leagues. Oscar Charleston, Bingo DeMoss, Frank Warfield, Ben Taylor, Dizzy Dismukes, Dave Malarcher, and Biz Mackey. A generation of Negro Leaguers learned baseball from men who learned baseball from C.I. Taylor. There were 2 great managerial trees in Black baseball belonging to Rube Foster and C.I. Taylor. These 2 men taught Blacks how to play professional baseball. One of the great tragedies of major league integration is that they brought in players, but excluded coaches and managers and cut off these trees of accumulated wisdom forever. Sort of the baseball equivalent of Caesar burning down the Library of Alexandria. Dave Malarcher, born 66 years to the day before me in Whitehall, Louisiana, died in Chicago in 1982 at the age of 87. Third baseman for the Indianapolis ABCs and Chicago American Giants, 1916 to 34. Manager of the American Giants, 26 to 28 and 31 to 34. Dave Malarcher resides squarely at the intersection of the Rube Foster and C.I. Taylor managerial trees. He got his start in pro baseball with C.I.'s Indianapolis ABCs. And after 3 seasons in Indy plus a brief stop in Detroit, he graduated to Rube's Chicago American Giants in 1920, the first season of the Negro National League. The American Giants won the first 3 NNL pennants, with Malarcher near the top of the order as their regular third baseman. He was a scholarly man, college-educated, universally known as Gentleman Dave, and a brainy ball player, an expert in the nuances of scientific baseball so prevalent in the dead ball era he emerged from. Malarcher was an excellent fielder, bunter, and base runner, and a master at the aggressive small ball strategies favored by Rube Foster. Now, wins above replacement isn't the final authoritative word on anything, but it can be a very useful tool, especially for sorting players into big, broad groupings. I wouldn't get too concerned about who ranks ahead of whom. It's not a stat for those fine distinctions, but to separate the great from the very good from the okay, WAR can be quite helpful. And I must confess, I was somewhat surprised by how much WAR likes Dave Malarcher. Amongst Negro League third basemen all time, he ranks 3rd in total wins above replacement, behind Judd Wilson and John Beckwith. Those 2 are at the top of the WAR per 162 games list, and Malarcher is tied for 6th. And it's worth pointing out that we're definitely in Hall of Fame territory here. The names I've highlighted in yellow have plaques in Cooperstown, and John Beckwith, not highlighted, has one of the strongest arguments for inclusion of any Negro leaguer. Malarcher's second career began in 1926 when the great Rube Foster suffered a mental breakdown and was committed to an asylum. Malarcher took over the helm from Foster as manager and guided the American Giants to their first league title in 4 years, followed by World Series victory over Dick Lundy's Backrack Giants. Malarcher's American Giants repeated as World Series champs in 27, again over the Backracks, and only the wartime Homestead Grays of 1943 and 44 would duplicate this feat of winning back-to-back Negro League World Series. His managerial record was stellar. In 7 seasons at the helm in Chicago, Malarcher won those 2 World Series, another pennant in 32, finished in first place in the disputed pennant race of 1933, and reached the league championship series in 1934 before falling to the Philadelphia Stars. There are a number of Hall of Famers whose playing careers fell just short, a little short of immortality, but who crossed the finish line on the strength of their managing. Joe Torre comes to mind, Bucky Harris, perhaps Gil Hodges, but perhaps the best Cooperstown comparison for gentleman Dave Malarcher is Ren Schoendienst, another slick fielding infielder who was an important cog in multiple pennant winners in St. Louis and Milwaukee, and then went on to win more titles as Cardinal manager. When you can identify multiple comparable Hall of Famers, you're looking at a Hall of Famer. Dave Malarcher's combined excellence as a player and manager makes him an obvious candidate in my mind for baseball's highest honor. And an even more obvious candidate and 2024 finalist is Vic Harris. Born June 10, 1905 in Calhoun, Alabama, died in 1978 in Los Angeles at the age of 72. Outfielder for the Homestead Grays, Pittsburgh Crawfords, and others from 1922 to 47. Manager of the Grays, 36 to 42, 45 to 48. As a teenager, Vic Harris played nearby for the Cleveland Tate Stars and Cleveland Baseball Browns. He also briefly played for Rube Foster's Chicago American Giants, but he came into his own after joining Cumberland Posey's Homestead Grays in 1925. He was a solid player, the regular left fielder on some great teams. And in 1937, when owner Posey stepped aside as Grays manager, he selected Vic Harris to be his successor. And that season, Harris led the Grays to their first Negro National League pennant. They finished first again in 1938 and 39 and 40 and 41 and 42. In 1943 and 44, Harris stepped aside to perform World War II defense plant work. He returned as manager in 1945 and won his 7th consecutive regular season title. The major league record is 5, held by Casey Stengel. In 11 seasons as Grays manager, Vic Harris finished first 8 times, second twice, and won third place finish. He had a .666 lifetime winning percentage. These are the 22 major league managers who are in the Hall of Fame alongside their lifetime winning percentages. And here's where Vic Harris would rank on this list. You'll notice John McGraw, Miller Huggins, Ned Hanlon, and Connie Mack on this list, the men whose managerial trees still influence the game today. Because of the major league's only partial integration, Vic Harris never had a chance to start a managerial tree or extend his own branches off Rube Foster's. Finally, I'd like to take a look at a couple of outside-the-box candidates. You won't typically find these guys on lists of likely Hall of Famers, but I think at the very least they're deserving of some consideration. Bill Pettis, also called Zach Pettis, born August 13th, 1884 in Goliad County, Texas, died in New York City in 1924 at the age of 40. First baseman and catcher for the Chicago Giants, New York Lincoln Giants, Brooklyn Royal Giants, New York Lincoln Stars, Backrack Giants, and others, 1909 to 1923. This is the 1912 New York Lincoln Giants, one of the most famous and successful ball clubs of the dead ball era. And these are the three Hall of Famers on the Lincolns. Shortstop John Henry Lloyd at the top, and catcher Louis Santop seated on the left next to pitching legend Smokey Joe Williams. Two other members of this team are frequently cited as Hall of Fame candidates. Center fielder Spotwood Poles, standing on the right, and pitcher Cannonball Dick Redding, seated just to the right of the mascot. And this is first baseman and backup catcher Bill Pettis, at best the sixth most famous member of this 113-year-old baseball team. If you have to be famous to make the Hall of Fame, Bill Pettis hasn't got a chance. Pettis broke into big-time blackball with the Kansas City Giants in 1909 and spent the next two seasons with the Chicago Giants. Both of these teams, by the way, have been recognized as being of major league quality by a special SABR subcommittee. He joined the Lincoln Giants in 1912 and spent the rest of his career with leading Eastern teams like the Lincoln Giants, Lincoln Stars, Brooklyn Royal Giants, Backrack Giants, Philadelphia Giants, and Hilldale. Before we had detailed stats, Bill Pettis was recognized as an all-star caliber player, but nothing more than that, a candidate at best for the Hall of Very Good. Statistics, however, tell a different story. These are the on-base plus slugging leaders in Bill Pettis's prime, a 9-year period between 1912 and 1920, when he was between the ages of 27 and 35. And he ranks second in OPS amongst all Negro leaguers, behind the great Cristobal Torriente and ahead of Santop, Oscar Charleston, Pete Hill, and Ben Taylor, and John Henry Lloyd, among others. The players highlighted in yellow are Hall of Famers. This chart is slugging percentage leaders for the dead ball era, which I define as 1900 to 1919. And once again, Torrey is behind only Torriente and ahead of everyone else. You'll notice that Pettis is ahead of sometime teammate Louis Santop on these lists. Before the publication of detailed stats, Santop was held up as dead ball's greatest black slugger. But the fact is, it's Pettis who put up the numbers we would have expected from the more famous Hall of Famer. They're very close as hitters, 869 to 855 OPS. But it's the way they got there that was unexpected. Santop is better at batting average and on-base percentage, while Pettis has the higher slug and hit more home runs. Personally, this was one of the biggest single surprises in the Seamheads database. And he wasn't just a one-dimensional slugger. The fielding metrics at Seamheads rank Pettis in the 98th percentile of first baseman, and he's second all time in runs saved per 1,000 innings for first baseman. In wins above replacement per 162 games among first basemen, Pettis ranks number 2 behind Buck Leonard, but ahead of Mule Suttles and Ben Taylor. Pettis passed away from tuberculosis at the age of 40 in 1924, just a year after his last appearance in big-time blackball. He was lauded at the time as a great ball player, but over the years the memory of Bill Pettis faded, and he was rarely mentioned among the legends of blackball. I really don't know if Bill Pettis is a Hall of Famer. He certainly wasn't famous even on his own teams. But just as we don't hold it against him that he was forced to play in a segregated setting apart from the self-proclaimed elite of the game, we shouldn't penalize him because his statistics were unknown for the better part of a century after his death. In and of themselves, those statistics don't prove he belongs in Cooperstown, but they do point in that direction and invite further investigation into this little-known star. And our final candidate this morning is Don Newcombe, born June 14th, 1926 in Madison, New Jersey, died in Los Angeles in 2019 at the age of 92. Pitcher for the Newark Eagles, 1944 to 1945, then more famously with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Don Newcombe has already been considered and rejected by Hall of Fame selectors several times. He made 15 appearances on the baseball writers ballot. His best finish was 16th place in 1980, 15.3% of the vote. He's been on the Classic Era Veterans Committee ballot 3 times. His best finish there was 13th place with 20.7% in 2007. And if you look at the major leagues, the summary of his major league career, 10 seasons, 153 wins against 96 losses, 3.57 ERA. The list of the most similar pitching careers to this one features names like Schoolboy Rowe, Roy Oswald, Cliff Lee, and Mike the Bear Garcia, members at best of the Hall of Very Good. So why am I proposing that Newcombe get another crack at immortality? Because I really don't think the totality of his career has been considered fairly. So let's take a look. Don Newcombe debuted with the Newark Eagles as an 18-year-old in 1944. The following season, the teenager went 5-3 with a 2.95 ERA and attracted the attention of Branch Rickey's Brooklyn Dodgers, who signed him before the 1946 season as part of their second wave of integration. Newcombe joined 24-year-old Roy Campanella in Nashua, New Hampshire, with the Dodgers' Class B team in the New England League. Nuke went 14-4 with a 2.21 ERA as the team finished in second place. But the pace of early integration was glacial. And while Campanella moved up to the AAA Montreal Royals, Newcombe was returned to Nashua. A 19-6-1 loss record and 24 complete games and 27 starts in that second season in New Hampshire finally convinced Brooklyn that Newcombe was ready to move up, but only as far as Montreal. With the Royals in 1948, Nuke went 17-6 with a 3.14 ERA, threw a no-hitter, and won 3 playoff games as the Royals won the International League Championship. And just like Jackie in 46 and Campy in 47, Nuke's success in 48 meant he was ready to graduate to the big club. One could argue, persuasively I think, that Don Newcombe was ready to pitch in the majors before 1949. He'd pitched in what is now recognized as a major league in 44 and 45 as a teenager, though admittedly those were war years. He dominated in Nashua, yet wasn't advanced, so he dominated in Nashua again, and then in Montreal as part of the Dodgers' step-by-step plan. One thing we know for certain is that when he was given the chance with Brooklyn, he was once again dominant. 17-8, 3.17 ERA, a league-leading 5 shutouts, and winner of the Ford Frick Award as National League Rookie of the Year. Over his first 3 seasons in Brooklyn, Don Newcombe went 56-28, was a 3-time All-Star as the Dodgers won 3 consecutive pennants. More importantly, Don Newcombe was a trailblazer. When Newcombe debuted in 49, he was just the 3rd black man to pitch in the major leagues. Dan Bankhead pitched 4 games with Brooklyn in 1947, and the ageless Satchel Paige helped Cleveland win a championship in 48, and that was it. And just as people used to ignorantly believe blacks couldn't play quarterback in the NFL, there was a belief among many that blacks didn't have what it takes to pitch successfully in the major leagues. And Don Newcombe was the man who proved otherwise. And then Newcomb was drafted and served 2 years in the U.S. Army during the Korean War and missed the entire 1952 and 1953 seasons. Folks talk about how players like Ted Williams and Bob Feller lost prime years to World War II, but it's rarely mentioned that the same thing happened to Don Newcomb. After three All-Star appearances in his first three seasons, what might years 4 and 5 look like? Newcomb was rusty when he returned in 54, but in 1955 he went 20-5 and finished seventh in the MVP voting as the Brooklyn Dodgers finally won their long elusive first World Championship. And in 1956, Newcomb was simply the best player in baseball. 27 wins against 7 losses, a 3.06 ERA, a whip of 0.99, National League Most Valuable Player, and recipient of the first ever Cy Young Award. And it should be pointed out that Don Newcomb was also one of the best hitting pitchers ever. In the Dodgers championship year of 55, Nuke batted .359 with 7 homers and 23 runs batted in. He was used as a pinch hitter 106 times in his career. And a big thank you to Baseball Reference's BR Bullpen for this amazing nugget. Newcomb's NLAL lifetime batting average of .270 is 1 point higher than that of his Hall of Fame teammate Pee Wee Reese. Nuke was 30 years old in his award-winning season of 56 and declined precipitously after that lofty peak. Later in life, he admitted that alcoholism prevented him from enjoying greater success. And like many of the boys of summer, he had a difficult time adjusting to the Dodgers' move to Los Angeles, particularly after the car accident that paralyzed his longtime friend Roy Campanella. The LA Dodgers traded him to Cincinnati in 1958, where he had a brief bit of success, and he finished his major league career in 1960 as a 34-year-old member of the Cleveland Indians bullpen. But Newcomb wasn't finished with baseball just yet. After spending the 61 season in the Pacific Coast League, Don joined Larry Doby on the 1962 Chunichi Dragons. The pioneering pair of Newark Eagle veterans thus became the first former major leaguers to play in the Japanese major leagues. Newcomb rarely pitched for the Dragons, but hit .262 with 12 homers as a part-time first baseman. So let's go back to that less than inspiring stat summary we started with and see what we can add to it. 2 seasons in the Negro Leagues. 3 seasons in the minor leagues that were arguably 1 or 2 more than were necessary. 2 prime seasons unarguably lost to military service. Rookie of the Year, Cy Young Award, MVP, 4-time All-Star, pioneer and trailblazer who decisively disproved the prevailing racist myth that blacks couldn't pitch in the major leagues. I don't know about you, but that looks like a Hall of Fame career to me. Among my sources for this presentation were James Riley's indispensable biographical encyclopedia and John Holloway's Voices from the Great Black Baseball Leagues. Websites used include the Baseball Hall of Fame site, seamheads.com, Baseball Reference, and the Saber Bio Project. The clippings came from newspapers.com and Saber's best membership perk, the ProQuest Historical Black Baseball Newspapers Database. And a special thank you to Ted Noor for providing the stats on the Hall of Fame's racial demographics. I'd like to thank our collaborators, Lifeline Sports, Community Cup Classic Foundation, Panache 5, Cuyahoga County Public Library, South Euclid Lyndhurst Branch, the partnership, and yours truly. And a special thanks to our most valuable partner, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture.